The Unmade have burned cities and destroyed families, and today we're going to be looking at all 9 and considering just what the future may hold for the Splinters of Odium. The Unmade are the 9 splinters of the Shard Odium. Brandon Sanderson has confirmed this directly, which means Odium, the shard of passion and hatred, the god who has spent millennia murdering other shards across the Cosmere, voluntarily shattered a piece of his own power to create them. The number of them is also significant, as confirmed by Brandon. 9 is Odium's number. They are, by extension, pieces of Odium himself, broken off deliberately and sent out into Roshar. The reason why Odium did this becomes clearer when you understand what he was working against. The Stormfather is Honor's great spren. The Night Watcher is cultivations. For Odium, that parallel isn't just one entity, it's 9. Collectively, the 9 Unmade are his presence on Roshar. He reaches into the minds and cities of the people that he wants to break. Wind and Truth confirmed what fans had long theorised about when they were made. Tanavast, the Vessel of Honor, describes the whole thing as an arms race. His words: "First came his fused, then my heralds. Then his Unmade, then my radiance." Each side escalating in response to each other. The Unmade were supposed to be the counter to the Heralds. But here is where things genuinely get interesting. What were they before Odium got to them? In Yelig'nar, Rosharan, one of the more self-aware of the 9, tells Shallan, "We were made and then unmade." Consider the implications of that. They were something before they were unmade. This suggests that the Unmade were originally native Rosharan spren. Spren of concepts, perhaps a spren of joy, maybe a spren of connection, or a spren of prophecy. They were something that existed as part of Roshar's natural cognitive ecosystem, until Odium found them and stripped out their original investiture, replacing it with his own. During Rhythm of War, Rabonio attempts to unmake the sibling using Voidlight and the Surge of Transformation, and the sibling expresses absolute terror that she will be left as one of the Unmade, proving that the Unmade are the result of a corruption process inflicted on existing spren. Think about what that means for each of them. Ashert-Man, the heart of the revel, may once have been a spren of celebration, of genuine human joy, but Odium took that and twisted it into something that leads people to indulge until they rot and wither. Reshafir, the Midnight Mother who creates dark imitations of living things and seems to genuinely want to understand humanity. Maybe once she was something that created rather than mimicked, something that helped rather than hunted. To me, this makes the Unmade one of the more tragic elements of the entire series, because they didn't choose their nature, they were altered, transformed by Odium. And we know that at least a few of them actually remember that they were once something better. But now let's look in closer detail at each one of the Unmade. The first thing you should know is that among the 9 Unmade, there are varying levels of sentience. Some are powerful mindless forces, while others are sentient, capable of relations with the civilians of Roshar. First then, Ner'Gaul, as you know it, the Thrill. As you read through the Stormlight Archive series, you felt his influence long before you knew his name. Ner'Gaul is the source of the thrill, the intoxicating rush that Alethi warriors feel in battle, the joy of killing for its own sake. He had been quietly soaking into Alethkar culture for centuries, and Dalinar spent years addicted to his influence without even knowing it. Ner'Gaul moves, he drifts across the continents, and wherever he settles, battles become bloodier and more senseless. For a time he was in Yakaved, feeding the civil war there, and then he went back to Alethkar, and in Oathbringer, at the Battle of Thaylen Field, Dalinar, in one of the more satisfying moments during the series, trapped Ner'Gaul in a move that saw Dalinar continue his arc in becoming a better man. He drew upon his bondsmith abilities and his own deeply personal connection to the Thrill, and imprisoned Ner'Gaul inside a gemstone, and he's been contained there ever since. Next, Ashert-Man, the heart of the revel. Where Ner'Gaul weaponizes violence, Ashert-Man weaponizes pleasure. He takes the form of a massive, inhuman black heart with black veins thick as a man's legs spreading into the ground around him. And his gift to those nearby is a compulsion to indulge, to eat, to drink, to revel, to forget everything else that exists. Again, we see him most clearly in Yelig'nar during Oathbringer, where he had taken up residence on the Oathgate platform itself. His physical form was sitting inside the control building, black veins spreading into the ground around him, while the Cult of Moments feasted endlessly outside. The closer you got to him, the harder it was to think about anything else but the lust for indulgence. Shallan infiltrated the Cult of Moments on the Oathgate platform, getting close enough to feel the full pull of his influence. But Ashert-Man fled. But this wasn't because of Shallan. Jarnat revealed that he had already fled on purpose, leaving the corrupted Oathgate as a trap. And so he left when it suited him, not because anybody made him. Next, Moalak, the Death Rattles. Moelak is tied to the boundary between life and death. When he is near, dying people speak prophecy, the death rattles. You may recall these death rattles. They were the epigraphs at the start of every chapter at the beginning of the Way of Kings. Their souls linger at the threshold between the physical and the cognitive realms, and something bleeds through. These death rattles have been consistently accurate, and as you may be aware, Taravangian and his scholars collected and studied them extensively, using them to refine and validate his grand plan, the diagram. Much like Ner'Gaul the Frill, Moelak moves around Roshar. You can track him by where the death rattles are being reported. He has been recorded to have been in Kharbranth, as we know from Taravangian study, but also the Horneater Peaks. Now Chiamarish, the Dust Mother. Almost nothing is known. Ancient texts reference her, some scholars confused her with the Night Watcher, but for the most part her involvement has yet to be seen. Now Yelig'nar, Blightwind. Of the 9, Yelig'nar is the most immediately dangerous in combat, as we saw in the Battle of Phelan Field with Amaram. Yelig'nar can bond a human host, and when he does, he grants him access to the 9 surges simultaneously. The noted absent surge being Adhesion, Honor's surge. Interestingly, Sanderson has confirmed that Yelig'nar would theoretically have access to the surge now, following the events of Wind and Truth. And so Yelig'nar has access to every Radiant Order's power in one vessel. The cost is that he consumes the host. Gemstones grow under their skin, and when the transformation is total, it is fatal. We saw Queen Aesudan bond him in Oathbringer, and then Meridas Amara, and Kaladin, a third ideal Windrunner at the height of his abilities, struggled enormously against Yelig'nar. He had to be saved by Rock, his Bridge 4 companion. Following this, Yelig'nar simply separated from his host. He has no fixed form of his own. He did come back in Wind and Truth, defeated again, but this time almost as an afterthought compared to the chaos around him. All he needs is a new gemstone and someone desperate enough to swallow it. Now Re-Shafir, the Midnight Mother. Re-Shafir observes humanity and tries to replicate it. She is particularly drawn to acts of violence, and therefore seeks to replicate these in exquisite detail. To do this, she spawns Midnight Essence, dark, shadowy duplicates of living creatures. The longer she observes you fight back, the better her creations become at countering you. As you know, she was hiding in the heart of Urithiru, which explains a lot why the tower felt so wrong at the very start when the Alethi first arrived. Shallan found her and confronted her, and during that confrontation Shallan sensed something from Re-Shafir, a longing, a desire to understand humanity that she could not fulfill through mimicry alone. She wasn't purely predatory, she was curious, and whatever she was before Odium got to her, maybe that curiosity was the original thing. And so Shallan drove Re-Shafir out of Urithiru, and so she fled through the tunnels and disappeared, and she's been loose ever since. Notably, Shallan wasn't the first Lightweaver to push her out of that tower. A Radiant did the same before the Recreants, and Re-Shafir simply came back. While her current location is unknown, we do know that she is still in contact with the Fused. And now Gonarthesis, the Blackfisher. She has been the most underestimated of the 9. Her power is that of the creation of Elsegates, portals of violet light that connect 2 locations with high concentrations of investiture, allowing armies to move between them. In Wind and Truth, Taravangian deployed her for exactly this purpose, and El led hundreds of Regals through an Elsegate that she created at the Horneater Peaks, connecting cultivation's perpendicularity to the Well of Control, funneling an army directly onto the Shattered Plains. But here's the detail that should have your attention. Odium himself called her too dangerous to unleash, and a Fused named Vienta considered the decision so outside of reason that it was barely worth consideration. And the price required to activate her Elsegate is described as something that even Taravangian was putting off, and may still yet have to pay. As a reminder, she also appears in a death rattle. A dying woman cries, "Let me no longer hurt, let me no longer weep. Gonarthesis, the Blackfisher holds my sorrow and consumes it." Emotional pain and grief, that's what she feeds on. And she wishes, in her own words, to break and burn the world. She is a threat that even Odium hesitates to use, and used her anyway. But at what cost? If Hessi's Mythica is to be believed, Gonarthesis can be attributed to the Scouring of Amir. I imagine we will likely see her involvement in the second arc of the Stormlight Archive, perhaps trying to break and burn the world as she desires. Now Jaranat, the Taker of Secrets. Jaranat is the one that the ancient Radiants feared most of all the Unmade, because she corrupts spren with Odium's investiture. She touches them and they change. Their appearance shifts, they gain new abilities, and Jaranat refers to this process as enlightening. She is the reason for all the strange spren that you see in Yelig'nar during Oathbringer, and at the request of Odium, she corrupted the Oathgate spren in Yelig'nar, turning the portal into a trap. But crucially, she had agency in this act, and did not follow Odium's wishes entirely. So at the same time, she ensured that the Oathgate transported Shallan and co. to a safer location. Xehanort also corrupted Gliss, the spren that bonded Rosharan, and in doing so she may have enabled one of the more significant Radiant bonds in the series, because a Truth Watcher bonding an Enlightened spren gave Rosharan his ability to see into the future. And here is what separates Xehanort from every other Unmade, except perhaps Ba-Ado-Mishram. Xehanort can talk to people, and she can reason with them. And as discussed earlier, she warns Shallan. She operates with apparent goals of her own, goals that include protecting her children, both Enlightened spren and corrupted Radiant spren. She fears what Odium could do to them, and the diagram itself suggests that one of the Unmade is a traitor. Most readers believe that that traitor is Xehanort, but I'm not so sure. And now finally the greatest of all the Unmade, Ba-Ado-Mishram. The most powerful, the most complex, the one with a three-part name, which by fan-observed patterns in the series correlates to those with the highest level of intelligence among the Unmade. But we'll come back to her properly later in this video. One thing that we've seen in the Stormlight Archive is that the nature of the Unmade is not fully understood by the Cosmere scholars. The in-world scholarship, including Hessi's Mythica, which provides most of our epigraph information, tends to blur the lines of the nine together into one singular concept of evil. They become a vague theological threat rather than nine distinct individuals with different natures, different levels of intelligence, and different methods of operating. And Brandon wasn't just pulling their names out of thin air. Every single Unmade name is derived from real-world mythology, specifically from the deities of Near Eastern antiquity, and from Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos. Ner'Gaul from Nergal, the Mesopotamian god of war and death. Reshafir from Reshef, the Canaanite plague deity. Xehanort from Anat, the Semitic war goddess. Moalak from Moloch, the biblical figure associated with fire and sacrifice. Dei Gonarthesis from Dagon, the Canaanite fisher god who also appears in Lovecraft. Ashert-Man from Asherah, the Sumerian sea goddess associated with fertility cult. And Shemarash from Shemosh, the god of Moabites. What I find particularly curious is that Moloch, Dagon, Asherah and Shemosh all appear in Milton's Paradise Lost as fallen angels, which means that Brandon may have been drawing not just from original mythology, but from tradition of these figures as corrupted heavenly beings, as things that were made and then unmade. Sound familiar? One caveat worth flagging here is that the Coppermind notes that the powers and characteristics of the Unmade don't necessarily match their mythological counterparts. So don't go too deep in trying to reverse engineer their abilities from these ancient texts, but it is a rather interesting thought experiment. And another thing worth flagging, the compound name pattern. Ba-Ado-Mishram has three parts, Reshafir, Xehanort, and Yelig'nar have two, Ner'Gaul and Ashert-Man one. As discussed earlier, that pattern correlates almost perfectly with their demonstrated intelligence, and theorised by the fans. That said, Brandon did actually say that the names of the Unmade don't necessarily correlate to the fragmentation of their original spirits. So perhaps we should be wary about attributing too much weight towards the names themselves. Personally, I think the theory of their names indicating their sapience is well rooted, and even if it is coincidental, it's interesting, and what harm is there in believing it further? With Wind and Truth done and a 10-year time jump incoming, Stormlight has gone from Roshar, and we have 9 ancient Unmade scattered across the planet in various states of containment, freedom and mystery. So what next? For most of the Unmade, there isn't a solid agreed theory. The Mindless Three, Ner'Gaul, Moalak and Ashert-Man are wildcards during the 10-year gap. The Radiants are powerless to stop them with Stormlight gone from the world, and there is nothing to hold them in check. But Xehanort is the one that the community keeps coming back to outside of Ba-Ado-Mishram. At the end of Wind and Truth, Shallan returns the corrupted spren to her, which reads as Brandon deliberately keeping the alliance warm going into the second act of the series. The expectation is that Xehanort will continue operating as something as an inside agent, an Unmade working against Taravangian's Odium, pursuing her own goals but protecting her children. Whether she can ever fully be trusted is something that we'll probably be debating until the 6th book drops. Reshafir fled Eurytheria when Shallan drove her off, and has been unbound ever since. With no Radiance to threaten her during this 10-year gap, she has a decade to return to wherever she wants. Yelig'nar is unbound somewhere after his second defeat in Wind and Truth. Shiamaris remains genuinely unknown, and one of the 9 Brandon has given us almost nothing on. Daegon Arthesis has been deployed by Taravangian at tremendous and still unrevealed cost. Maybe the most dangerous unresolved thread of all going into Arc 2. But all of this is preamble, because the real conversation and the one with the most emotional stakes is Ba-Ado-Mishram. Ba-Ado-Mishram was a powerful Unmade who healed injured singers on the battlefield. Singers who were spiritually dependent on their god, Odium. In time, Ba-Ado-Mishram made her move and fully absorbed Odium's well of control, likely Odium's perpendicularity. This effectively meant that she supplanted Odium for the singers and became their new god, their spiritual anchor. It connected her to all the singers on Roshar, a critical factor when considering what was to come, and so she was able to grant forms of power and the ability to use Void Light. These events led to a new type of war, one without the fuse which was later known as the False Desolation. After years of war, when the Windrunner Gareth and his singer-lover Shimon brought Mishram to the table, she was ready to negotiate with the humans. And Honor, Tanavas himself, betrayed her. He convinced the bondsmith Malishi to imprison her, regardless of her willingness to cooperate. And so together with a strike force, they trapped her inside a perfect gemstone. This was done in spite of warnings from Radiant scholars who warned of the potential ramifications of trapping a being so connected with the singers. And the consequences were dire. This betrayal sent out a discordant note that reverberated across Roshar and stripped the identity and connection from the singers, turning them into the parchment slaves you saw throughout the Way of Kings. Not only that, but the dishonourable act caused the Shard of Honor to reject Tanavast, who was later killed by Odium. Once the Radiants found out, they also renounced their oaths, creating a large number of Deadeyes among the Spren, but also depriving humankind of one of their greatest assets. It's fair to say this betrayal of Ba-Ado-Mishram was a travesty for Roshar. And so, at the end of Wind and Truth, Renarin and Relaine found her prison and freed her. Her release immediately begins to heal the Deadeye Spren created on the Day of the Recreants, and the discordant note that has vibrated on Roshar's soul for thousands of years starts to resolve. It's also worth noting that Odium fears Mishram, which gives you some perspective as to the power that she commands on Roshar. So what will become of Mishram in the back half of the series? Well, there's 2 theories that I like. The first is the human singer bridge. Renarin and Relaine freed her together, a human and a singer, side by side, in a scene that Wind and Truth frames explicitly as proof that 2 peoples can coexist. As a reminder, Mishram's power is connection, continent-wide connection to an entire species which she demonstrated during the False Desolation. The theory is that in Arc 2 she will use the same abilities but in reverse. Not to bind the singers to Odium, but to rebuild what her imprisonment destroyed. To heal the broken bond between singers and humans. To restore what was taken from them when Malishi locked her away, a being whose imprisonment shattered an entire people, now free and working to put them back together. A redemption arc for someone that was never given the chance to choose. But can she overcome the resentment that such a betrayal would have inflicted on her? But the second theory is perhaps the one that excites me the most. And Mishram already has history here. She had been working against Odium for thousands of years before her imprisonment. She was a genuine threat to Odium. The theory is that in Arc 2 she will finish what she started thousands of years ago, and she will challenge Taravangian for the Shard. She could take Odium, or even retribution from him. We know from Interlude 6 of Wind and Truth that the power of Odium may actually prefer Ba-Ado-Mishram, a poetic turn given the lack of honour previously granted to her. That said, Brandon has already suggested that a spren cannot act as a vessel to a shard in the normal way. This is because it is already a shard of Aiden Alcium, which may actually dent this theory somewhat. That said, let me point you towards this quote from Hero of Ages. It effectively implies that Vin may have only gained suitability towards the Shard of Preservation only when she touched the Well of Ascension. Can we therefore not apply the same logic to Mishram, to suggest that her interaction with Odium's Well of Control and her subsequent connection to Roshar may open up the possibility that she could ascend to Odium? And perhaps a good fit if she does hold some hatred towards the humans. I expect she will be conflicted. She could hold the shard that she once served and the shard that betrayed her. Could her powers of connection guide her in an ascension to such diametrically opposed shards? And if that happens, if Ba-Ado-Mishram becomes the new vessel of retribution, then the shard that has become the greatest enemy for the Cosmere for millennia becomes something entirely different. Something that was once willing to betray Odium once already, that carries the memory of thousands of years of unjust imprisonment, and whose power is connection rather than hatred. And here's the thing, the theories don't even contradict each other. She could do both. She could heal the singers and the humans, rebuilding a bridge between two peoples, and then turn and take the shard away from the man who let her rot in a gemstone whilst he ascended to godhood. She could bridge both the peoples of Roshar and the shards that oversee it. This makes Ba-Ado-Mishram to me the single most consequential unresolved thread in the entire series. And this is the most compelling argument that the Unmade were never really the villains of this story. They were just the ones that Odium used, and the ones who finally might get a chance to choose differently. If Mishram can ascend to retribution, would she remake her brothers and sisters into whatever they were before? Could she save Roshar from the horror of their former selves? Or would she, like everyone else, be forced to bend to the will of the Shard? Now, before you go, if you enjoyed this Unmade deep dive, consider liking the video and subscribing. It motivates me more than you could possibly imagine. As I am still a new Cosmere creator, I'm still at a size where I'm able to get involved with every comment, and I absolutely will. So get in the comments and let's chat. Feel free to post your theories or even corrections and additions to this video. For me, it's all a part of a process of learning more about the Cosmere and building a community around that idea. And if you want to decide on my next video, every week you'll get a chance to decide on the topic. You can do this on the post section of my channel homepage. So do vote and get involved there also. Feel free to comment on these posts if I've missed something that you would love to see a video on. Now, to close this video out, together with Mishram's incredible story, what I keep coming back to is the line that Yelig'nar spoke to Shallan. We were made, then unmade. To me, it speaks of grief and regret, an acknowledgement of something lost, and perhaps in the second half of the series, Ba-Ado-Mishram will be the key to remaking the Unmade, the war on the planet, and perhaps even ascend to retribution. So that's the question I'm going to leave you with. Can the Unmade be remade? Not as Odium's tools, but as whatever they were before he got to them. Let me know in the comments what you think, and if there's an Unmade you think I've underserved here. There's so much to uncover with the Unmade, and I will be looking at each one of them individually in future videos. Because for now, the theories are all we've got for years to come yet. But as a reminder, I'm going to be giving you new videos every week. Well, that's my intention anyway, because I love looking at the Cosmere, and if I have the question, maybe you do too. Thank you for your time and support, and I'll see you in the next one.